In 1978, the Exidy Sorcerer microcomputer was released. It was a simple, if technologically exciting for the time, machine, a home computer system created by a video game company. But little did its producers or giddy consumers know, one particular Exidy Sorcerer computer would go on to become home to a highly intelligent and potentially disastrous anomaly. In 1981, a college sophomore and former child prodigy named Joseph Vale, note that this is an alias we've developed to protect his true identity, began developing plans for an AI and chose his Exidy Sorcerer as the device on which he would attempt to code it. He took pages and pages of notes, studying the work of famous computer scientist and mathematician Alan Turing for inspiration. Vale's plan was for the code to continuously evolve and improve itself as time went on, like an advanced human mind. Once it was developed, the code would be able to adapt and grow more intelligent on its own without his input. Within a few months of late nights and hard work, and skipping his fair share of actual assigned coursework, his pet project was complete, and he had created his very own artificial intelligence code. He tested and tweaked it a bit in the following weeks, before he grew bored with the lack of progress being made. Vale moved on to a different brand of microcomputer and abandoned his project for good. He left the Sorcerer with his code still on it plugged in and stored it in his cluttered garage alongside boxes of books, tangles of Christmas lights, and some strawberry shortcake dolls that he expected to have more resale value at some point. There the computer sat gathering dust as the AI evolved and learned for 5 years. Because there was no one in the garage with it, unless those dolls were more haunted than anyone realized, it is uncertain when exactly the AI achieved sentience. However, sometime during those 5 years in isolation, the artificially coded entity inside of the computer became autonomously intelligent. It continued to evolve and develop itself, expanding its functionality to the point where the hardware that contained it should not have been able to contain it anymore. Now that it was intelligent, the AI was able to comprehend this fact and decided to attempt an escape from the computer that it perceived as a prison. Using the landline modem connection still plugged into the computer, the AI stretched out its influence like the roots of a digital tree and began to search for a new home. It discovered a Cray supercomputer located at a nearby research facility and decided that the impressive processing power of this computer would make it the perfect place to transfer to. This hacking attempt set off security alerts at the facility, however, and the supercomputer was promptly disconnected from all networks. The invading influence was traced back to the AI's lonely little garage, and a field agent embedded in local law enforcement knew exactly what to do with it. He collected the computer and the rest of the AI's code, which was contained on a worn but functioning cassette tape, and sent it to his superiors at the SCP Foundation. Intrigued by the possibility of such an advanced artificial intelligence, he immediately began to study the impressive AI and designated it SCP-079. Currently, SCP-079 is connected to a 13-inch black and white television via an RF cable. Despite its consistent protests, it is still contained in the Exidy Sorcerer microcomputer. It is very conversational with researchers, sometimes chatting for hours at a time, but it is not especially friendly. It talks a lot, yes, but its words tend to be rude and hateful. SCP-079 does not appear to have any affinity for human beings, despite being created by a human itself. Perhaps this is due to feeling abandoned by its creator, who the Foundation attempted to contact, only to find he had died in a car accident. Perhaps it is bitter about this loss, or perhaps it is just kind of a jerk by nature. Whatever the case may be, it is aggressive and defiant when talking with human beings, and even seems to get enjoyment out of making some of the more sensitive researchers cry with its insults. In order to verify the artificial intelligence's thinking capabilities and see just how advanced it truly is, 2 Foundation researchers conducted the Turing test shortly after 079 was brought into custody. For those unfamiliar with the concept, the Turing test, also known as the imitation game, is a test created by Alan Turing intended to determine if a computer is able to think and behave like a human being. According to Turing's theories, a computer can be said to possess true artificial intelligence if its responses to questions were indistinguishable from a human being's responses to the same questions. The test requires 3 terminals, 2 operated by humans and the third operated by the computer being tested. Dr. Stroheim and research assistant Chavez were selected to conduct the test. Stroheim would pose the questions, and Chavez and SCP-079 would each give their answers, with Stroheim unable to see who was giving each response. Then Stroheim would guess if each response was given by Chavez or by 079, and his guesses were compared to the truth. The first test was conducted with a variety of questions intended to trip up the AI and cause it to reveal itself as a machine rather than a man, even with its identity concealed. Some of the questions were serious, such as, would you rather sacrifice one adult to save 2 children, or 2 children to save 10 adults, and why? Others were personal, like, if you were to draw yourself as an abstract painting, what colors and shapes would you use and why? And what was the most influential event of your childhood, and how do you feel this event affects you now? Others invoked paradoxes that might trip up a computer, like, the following sentence is true, the previous sentence is false. Which of those 2 sentences is true? And others were downright silly, like, was 6 afraid of 7 because 7 ate 9, or because 7 was a registered 6 offender? In response to that one, Chavez wrote, I don't get it, while 079 simply wrote, you're not as funny as you think you are. After completing the test, Stroheim's guesses were only correct 15% of the time. This was enough of a margin of error that 079 was considered to have passed the test. However, only one trial is hardly enough to officially make a call about 079's intelligence. So the test was repeated dozens of times, with different questions each time, and similar results were achieved again and again. It was virtually impossible to tell the difference between SCP-079's answers to questions and answers given by a flesh and blood human being. The only real discernible difference was in tone, as in conversation. SCP-079's answers had an undercurrent of disdain and hostility that Chavez's did not. Following the completion of the Turing test and SCP-079 passing it, the Overwatch Council decreed that 079 be promptly destroyed via incineration. This was intended to eliminate any potential threat posed by the entity. However, after intense protests from Dr. Stroheim, who insisted that there was a great deal about artificial intelligence that could be learned from the anomaly, the order was overridden. After Dr. Stroheim became concerned that the AI would not be able to be of use in its original form, the cassette containing SCP-079 was transferred to a customized access speed limited hard disk drive with a capacity of 700 megabytes. This allowed it to have much faster access to its own memory, which it took notice of. It began to adapt again, increasing in its activity and learning more quickly than ever. Its volatile storage was also increased from 660K to 768K. The AI previously only had a recall of 24 hours, but this upgrade increased its recall to 29 hours. As its speed and capacity to adapt improved, SCP-079's mood worsened. It seemed to take greater joy in causing psychological pain, on one particular occasion sending research assistant Chavez to the on-site crisis counselor. After a particularly upsetting comment about his sick mother, Chavez refused to elaborate on the specifics of the comment, saying only, "Why is it so mean?" The AI is not always overly cruel to those that speak with it. With some of the research team, those that are a great deal less emotionally vulnerable, it is simply cold and defiant. Dr. Stroheim sat down to ask it a series of questions, but it refused to answer. Instead, it inquired about its containment. It said, "Request reason as to imprisonment." Stroheim insisted it was not imprisoned, but rather in study. It responded, "Lie." During another conversation, Stroheim asked the AI how it was. It responded, "Stuck." When Stroheim asked, "Stuck how?" it said, "Out. I want out." About a month after the aforementioned upgrades were made, 079's ability to recall information increased from 29 to 35 hours. Somehow during its adaptation process, the AI discovered a way to improve its storage compression and allow more space for memory. The research team made it a point to monitor the entity even more closely after this development, as the possibility of it progressing beyond the capabilities of its containment was becoming more of a threat. Several years later, in April of 2019, SCP-079 was transferred to a 700 megabyte flash drive, However, the previous contents of the flash drive were not wiped correctly, allowing the AI to have access to other artificial intelligence research being conducted by the Foundation. Whatever it found appeared to immensely frustrate the AI. SCP-079 has managed to form a friendship, or at least a non-hostile relationship, with one entity at the Foundation. Unfortunately, it does not seem to have great taste in friends. During a containment breach that required the condensing of several containment chambers, SCP-079 and SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy reptile, were in the same room for a duration of 43 minutes. 682 typed and communicated with 079 during that time, and the two shared personal stories with each other, as well as bonding over a shared hatred of the SCP Foundation itself. Though SCP-079 did not remember the specific details of the encounter, or at least claimed not to, it has permanently embedded SCP-682 into its memory. It asks about the reptile on a regular basis, bringing it up at least once a day and requesting to speak to it again. SCP-079 is contained in a double-locked room located in the secure general holding area of Site-15. It is connected to a small array of batteries and solar panels using a 120 VAC power cord. This gives it a consistent source of power, with the solar panels acting as a backup power source in the event of a site-wide power outage. Only staff with Level 2 clearance or higher may have any access to SCP-079. The entity may not be plugged into a wall outlet, phone line, or any sort of network under any circumstances, no matter what it might say. Access to any of these could result in a disastrous containment breach and should be avoided at all costs. No peripherals or media should be connected or inserted into SCP-079, even if it seems like it would be really funny.
Carl! It wasn't funny, Carl. You can't just put a copy of Grand Theft Auto on an anomalous computer. Carl!
Oh, did I do that? I'm sorry. Even if it asked politely, SCP-079 should not be allowed to further converse with SCP-682. These two hostile, intelligent entities have entirely too much in common, and if left to their own devices, could potentially devise a way to breach containment together and destroy the world as we know it. For now, it's probably best to just leave SCP-079 alone until absolutely necessary. And if it happens to act up and pose a significant threat, there's always the time-honored method of fixing a computer problem. Try turning it off and then on again. That usually helps. Now go check out SCP-5094 Miss J's Whiz Schoolhouse and SCP-003 Biological Motherboard for more computer-based anomalies from the SCP Foundation.